Learning does not stop after graduation, right? Most of us actually after realize, hey, I kind of like learning. Should have done more in school.
Yeah.
But there are many ways to learn about ourselves and understand why we do certain things.
Yeah, we've got something called attachment theory, and it helps us understand how experiences when we were young could actually impact us as adults and in our current relationships.
So here to help us explain how attachment theory can help us in our lives is Dr. Karen Ryan with Nystrom and Associates. Dr. Ryan, nice to see you.
Good to see you. Hello.
This attachment idea is so interesting, and it really, I think, is so demonstrative of how social of creatures we are as humans.
How we are programmed.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, okay, what does it mean when you talk about attachment?
Yeah, attachment is really a deep emotional bond and connection between two people, and it's two people who kind of seek each other out for comfort and then feel more secure when you're with that attachment figure. And so attachment theory is about how do our caregivers respond to us when we're infants, and how do they respond to our needs, and then that kind of forms a framework of how we perceive relationships moving forward.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh.
So it's kind of a mouthful.
Yeah. I mean, well, but you bring it down into different areas and different styles of attachment as well. So, you've kind of narrowed this down into 4 different ones.
Yeah. So there's some prominent psychologists who studied this and really came up with 4 different attachment styles. Again, kind of based on when children, as we're programmed to seek that connection and attachment, how do the caregivers respond? How receptive are they to that? And so there's 4 different styles of attachment that we develop from that. The first is secure. So a secure attachment comes from when an infant kind of cries and has needs, and that caregiver is attuned and adequately meets those needs.
Right.
The benefit is, a lot of us, it's 70% of the time. So it's not 100% of the time. So for caregiving, it's if we can do it 75% of the time even to be attuned to that child, then we develop a sense of that person's there for me. I can trust people. When I have a need, whether it's emotional or physical, I can reach out, I can get that. And then that translates to the healthiest type of relationship where you communicate, you reach out to that person, you get comfort and support from that person and offer it back. So a secure relationship is kind of, or a secure attachment is kind of what we're looking for. It's the healthiest form of attachment.
Isn't it fascinating though how it goes all the way back to being an infant? And I think so many people just sort of think of like, this idea of babies as, I mean, obviously we love them or whatever, and we care for them, we want to take care of them, but that they don't really start to learn how to be people until they get older. And that's so not true.
That's so not true, because they're creating that mental framework and that sense of, can I trust people? Are they going to be there for me?
I mean, even say you cry out to that person.
Your
security.
Oh, this is going to make me cry just talking about this.
So the next style to talk about is an anxious attachment style. So an anxious attachment style can develop when the caregiver gives kind of inconsistent responsiveness to the child's needs. So sometimes it might be loving and caring, and other times be kind of dismissive or kind of push them away. And so you can see then that child kind of builds this confusion of like, are they going to be there for me or not?
So then what happens as they get older?
As they get older, then what we can see is in relationships a big fear of abandonment and rejection, right? Because that sense of if I reach out for my need and I've been rejected, my fear is that's going to happen again. And so sometimes that can translate into being kind of clingy or hypervigilant in the relationship, or wanting to make sure their partner's needs are met, and sometimes not meeting their own. They're anxious about the relationship, anxious attachment style.
This is fascinating.
It is
really
fascinating.
is, to think
Yes.
about it that way.
The
Next
third
one?
style, is avoidant. So avoidant attachment style can develop when a caregiver is kind of distant, or might be overly strict, or is not kind of responsive or caring to those needs. And so what happens in us is we develop this kind of sense of like autonomy. We're like, I'm going to figure it out on my own, and this independence, because that's essentially what they had to do, because those needs weren't necessarily being met by the caregiver.
And then what happens if they're disorganized?
Yeah, disorganized is essentially when somebody's had trauma. So a disorganized attachment is when the caregiver is a source of like comfort and care, and also a source of pain and hurt and abuse. And so that's really hard internally, so that's a lot of work needing to be done on like how do I feel like my world is safe and I'm safe inside.
So this is so interesting, because what I wonder about it is then if you understand that you went through this as a child, which of course it was never your fault.
No.
You're born into whatever you're born into. But then that's your circumstance, and you have to work it out in order to have healthy relationships going forward.
And so we have this conversation not to be fatalistic and be like, oh, well, I guess I'm messed up in relationships. Not at all, right? That when we have this awareness, that allows us to have healing and recognize kind of the patterns we do and then shift them. And it's not to villainize parents, but it's that how do we kind of just bring that healing and recognize that.
Yeah, I think parents they're doing the best they can
So
every
often,
single
yes,
day.
exactly.
But how do you identify I mean, I feel like when you're looking through this, which one of these do I fit in? How do you do it?
I think sometimes as you read it, and there's great literature. There's an attachment project online where you can actually take quizzes and see it. And I bet some listeners would be like, oh my goodness, that's me. And other times like, well, that's kind of me and that's kind of me. So that's normal. But so just kind of researching and thinking through like, how do I handle when I feel vulnerable and I have an emotional need? Do I go to people and do I feel like I can trust them?
Okay.
Because that like rejection, that abandonment, like are those kind of issues that I struggle with?
Yeah.
And so
Okay.
that kind of helps tap into
Before
it.
we go, I wonder too, though, does all of this develop as an infant, or can you develop a different attachment if you have something later on?
Yes.
Ah.
Yeah. So if you have had an insecure, though the three kind of less positive ones are called
Right.
insecure attachments. So if you have those, but then you have a positive relationship with a secure person, it can absolutely shift that. And so as you have those positive experiences and learn people are trustworthy, I can shift how I approach it. I can help regulate my own emotions and validate them and get support. And absolutely, we can shift. So great point.
Bringing
Interesting.
awareness to all this is important.
Yeah,
Dr.
it is.
Ryan, she knows all the things. It's very good. Nystrom and Associates provides care in the fields of family therapy, psychiatry, psychology, and more. And if you're struggling with any sort of stress, anxiety, depression, or addiction, make sure you reach out to them today.
It's important to do,
Yeah,
for
it is.
sure.